Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now straight up top, if you do want to skip ahead to the painting, go ahead, but there is a little bit of housekeeping to tackle first, and that is that if you haven't seen the posts I've been making recently, I have had a minor operation and I've been a little bit tender. The doctor has been pretty clear about look after yourself, take things slowly, all that sort of stuff, which has meant that even getting downstairs to go and prime stuff outside has been a bit of a challenge. So this fella here, he is one of the Victrix Foot Knights. It's a relatively recent kit, and I figured I was going to paint him a little bit differently to how I normally would, because the army painter also sent me a set of their Speedpaint Markers. Now these things shocked me a little, if I'm honest, and I don't mean in like the huge gurning face thumbnail shocked kind of way. I just mean, that worked a lot better than I thought it would. So the colours for these are going to be listed in the description, same as always, but bear in mind if you can't get access to the markers or you just prefer using a brush, the colours are the same from the main Speedpaint range, so you can use those instead. Anyhow, let's keep things nice and simple. Let's get started. So to start off with, and admittedly kind of ignoring the army painter's advice on these things, I have started by spraying him first with matte black and hitting the entire miniature with that. And then from above, at a roughly 45-degree angle, I've hit him with a spray of Brainmatter Beige. Now I've gone over that in a couple of very light passes because I want to build that up similarly to how you would paint white. Multiple thin layers of a light primer are going to give you a better result than just trying to spray it on and fill it up. Now ironically, while we are predominantly interested in the markers, what I'm going to start with is a little bit of brushwork and some Crusader skin. Reason being, there isn't actually a skin tone in the starter set for these Speedpaint markers, which is a bit of a shame. I can only imagine there is a reason for it. But luckily, the army painter have been pretty vocal on Instagram and YouTube comments and what have you that there are going to be more colors coming. Just keep your eyes peeled. So at the moment, starting with the Crusader skin. So looking at the marker itself, these are produced between the Army Painter and Deep Cut Studio, and ironically, I do already have a couple of their products. Their gaming mats are really cool, so thumbs up for me on those as well, and I've got high hopes for these as a result. So you start out, I've given this a really good shake. It's quite important that you do shake the dickens out of them for the first time, and then we pop this off. There we go. And then in the cap is this little recess section where for the first time you use these, this takes a little bit of time. You pop it in and then press down, and that starts the flow of, you can see it in the brush there, starts the flow of the speed paint. Now this is not the quickest process the first time you do this, so hang tight. And don't be tempted to really slam down as hard as you can. It's not going to make this happen any faster. And then I'm going to apply Pallid Bone to his arming doublet. Now what I'm going to turn to here, this is Polished Silver. This one's going to be a little bit different to apply, because rather than using the tip, I'm going to use the side of the big old bristle here to lay down a slightly thicker layer on some of these areas. Speed paint's a tricky one for me, because honestly, when I'm painting, I tend to prefer using traditional acrylics. It just suits how I paint, and I tend to find it's a little bit quicker sometimes than the speed paint stuff. But these, see, this flows remarkably well. I really was expecting to have to fight this over the chainmail, but I'm just brushing it on. Use the edge of the brush there. Yeah, okay. So this will take me a little bit, of course, but I'm going to go over all of the metal bits with a bit of polished silver. Now here is one of the downsides to the size of these nibs, is that if I'm going to get into this little bit here, I don't think I'm going to do it without hitting some of the cloak. So while I've got that on, I'm going to quickly swap to a brush. Get a little bit of the Warpaint Stabilizer of all things. I tend to find this really good as a delete button. Just rinse away the bit that I have sort of overflowed on. And then I don't have to come back and tidy up my primer again. So, give that a couple of minutes to dry. Now, while that isn't typically how I would lay down a metallic base coat, that's actually come out pretty well. I do quite like that. What I'm going to turn to now is the hardened leather marker, and I'm doing this because, same as with the silver, I have a feeling it'll be easier to lay this down and correct any mistakes if I end up splurging over the yellow bits that I want to do later. So this, alright, this goes on pretty smooth. I like this. And it doesn't seem to run quite as much as the Speedpaint sometimes can. So let's try and get that into that little divot there. Now we get to the fun part. This is the bit I've been looking forward to. I have the Zealot Yellow pen here, and I'm going to go ahead. Yeah, I can see how this is going to be a little bit difficult over some flat surfaces, but after a couple of seconds, it does thin out and settle a bit more smoothly than I would have thought. That's not too bad, that. Alright, I'm going to go over his shield, and I'll also go ahead and start painting in his clothing with this. Making sure to work a little bit extra into some of the little nooks and crannies there. So just as I'm going over his back here, I did notice that the application is not all that different from a brush. You know, don't be too surprised. But what I mean is that the way that it flows from the tip of the pen itself is really easy to control. I'm still not certain that I'm the use case, you know, that Army Paint is really aiming these things for, but I have to admit I am way more surprised by these than I had imagined I would be. I was ready to write them off as kind of a toy, which is probably a little bit unfair, but having to play around with these, actually I am really enjoying. Yeah, if I'm going to call them toys, man, they're fun to play with. But seeing how quickly the base coats have gone on there, yeah. Once that's dried, that has come out way better than I thought it would. It still does have that slightly orange set in the recesses, and that's true of most of the yellow sort of speed paints and contrasts out there. But that's cool. I'm not unhappy with how that's turned out. What I am going to do, and this is where things go dreadfully wrong, I guarantee you. I'm hoping here. Just going to try and line up the center of the shield, and with the grim black marker, let's try laying down some stripes. Let's see if that's about the right angle. Now what I'm discovering is that as I push down, I do get a consistent width on the line I'm leaving behind. So, yeah, that's probably not quite perfect yet. Oh, I really should have done this with a plan. You know what? For a bit of speed paint over the top, that's not bad. I'm going to give that a little bit of time to dry and set solid, and then I'll put another bit of grim black over the top. I'm not unhappy with that. Now with that finished, yeah, that's not too bad. I would say it's quite simple, and I've probably picked the wrong miniature to really show these off. Only using a couple of colors feels a bit of a cop-out. But if I were painting my first miniatures, or, you know, say you were invited round to someone's game night or something, and you had a bunch of miniatures that you just wanted to throw some paint on, yeah, they're pretty all right. I'm more impressed with those than I thought I would be. But I do want to take things ever so slightly further, and I'm going to do it using stuff which is still relatively simple. So I have Hoplite Gold, which is the Speedpaint, one of the Speedpaint Golds, and I'm just going to pop a little bit of it on one or two spots on this fella, just to break up some of the silver, and try and keep him in focus. Now the male is a little bit flat, but concentrating still on simple, what I have here is some strong tone. Now I've not thinned this down like I normally would, so I'm going to be a little more careful in how I apply it than just drenching the miniature. But as you can see, this is not terribly taxing. What I'm going to do is just cruise around the whole fella, And over all of the metalwork, add a little bit of this strong tone. I really hope that's in focus. Now this is one where it can get out of hand relatively quickly, but once you've applied it, give it a couple of seconds to just settle, and then you can shift it around to somewhere that it looks a little better. You don't have to blop it on and then leave it and go, oh gosh, that's ugly. So, over all of the metal, and not too heavily, making sure to shift it around when you get any big clumps, apply some strong tone. From behind and from the front there, that does add, I think, quite a bit to that polished silver. Now what I'm going to do is I flip them around here, and I have on my small dry brush a little bit of space dust, which, as well as being fun to say, is one of my favorite of the Fanatic line. So what you'll see I'm doing is just very lightly dry brushing along the extreme folds and creases in the yellow stuff. I'm going to be careful as I come up to his belts and what have you. Doesn't need to be perfect, I just want to add a little bit more volume to his clothing. Now the other bonus there is that it does make his clothing look a little bit different to his shield. So, I'm happy enough with that. What I'm going to do now is take him outside and hit him with a matte varnish, and then pop his base on him. And the recipe for that will be in the description. So, kept things nice and simple. Let's get a look at what he looks like when he's all finished. And so, there at last, our knight is complete. And in trying to talk about the finish that the Speedpaint Markers give, I'm really going to be just repeating some of the things that I think about the Speedpaint. They are all right. You know, you're not going to win awards with these things for the most part, but that was a lot easier to do than I thought it was going to be. The one little tricky bit that I did have was up on his left shoulder, where his shield comes close to the side of his head. I did find it a little bit tricky to get in there with the pens, and I think that's probably the one point where the size of the nibs is a bit different to just using a brush. Now the bonus there is that because they are just speed paint, if you've got the speed paint colors, it's not going to matter too much. You can just use a brush for that section, or just use the brush on version anyhow. But the pens themselves were actually fun. I really don't know how to put it other than it was fun to paint with those. Now, the same as I really like Broadsword Silver and Hoplite Gold from the main speed paint range, the polished silver here was really easy to put on. I'm looking forward to using that on some other things. So again, thanks goes to Army Painter for letting me have one of these starter sets. I think they're pretty interesting. As well, thanks go to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.